No, I mean
that makes sense. Yeah.
I totally agree with you. See what you're saying. I mean, I could show you a picture like in white. I was kicking it with like white dudes, and like I said, I've always had friends outside culture because I never judged whether skinhead or this dude. Maybe he's down with the wood. I used to work out with some guys. They're like tripping out. Oh man, working out the brother. Like, dude, what you gonna do? Me and this dude's cool. So I've always had that. I've never looked at people like that. So I've always been indifferent when it comes to that. But I look at like a lot of people. They get stuck in it because they haven't had the opportunity to actually engage people outside their circle. They have a misconception, and like I said, once you get to talking to people, you realize there are a lot of similarities.
That's right.
And a lot of these people, maybe they're acting like this because they're trying to fit in and they're scared to be an individual. Because I used to see guys who were gang members and we would talk, super smart, but they get around the homies and they're stuck. Because that's how they came in, they got to play that role.
Yeah.
And so they're like, Big Hurt, man, dude, you don't go to the yard today, or hey, man, dude, but I got to do this because, the homies. And I respected that, but I seen that. And so I was like, always like, wow, maybe some of these guys are pressured in a certain situation because they got to do it because of the circumstances.
Yeah.
And so like as you get out, and that's one of the big things about when I do see people or young kids, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt. And some, they can be reached, but to some, they're just going to have to go the hard way. They're just not going to, they don't want to, maybe they're too far in until they get that reality check. But there's a lot of kids who have all these other talents and they just need a little bit of encouragement and somebody to believe in and to say, hey, man, why are you doing this, man, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, they'll spin off. They're like, dude, I'm cool.
Totally. And that's ultimately what I was saying, haven't taken that moment to allow that type of kindness to come in and do that, right? Man, I think I think the other thing that's a huge motivating and contributing factor is fear, and how a lot of people deal with fear and not really identifying what fear actually is. Some people only think about it in the situation of like if they're scared to do something, not necessarily diving deeper that maybe there's a fear of rejection, right? Or a fear of not being accepted, or a fear of, and a lot of that derives from trauma. And so I think, trauma plays a hell of a role, man, in twisting people up and the things that we go through. And one thing that I learned going through all these groups and hearing men talk, right, from all different walks of life, is people go through some pretty messed up stuff, you know, and they get their trust broken, and sometimes at very early ages in very traumatic ways. And that is also a huge contributing factor to why it is that people ultimately start to kind of like become chaotic and focused on destroying themselves and the things around them.
No, I understand that fully, because it's like the anger sends you on a whole nother path. And then as men, or even young men that aren't developed, because I feel like we don't develop to our late 20s, we hold in on a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. So you hold in all these emotions, and in your mind you're fighting with them, and then you don't really want to tell anybody because you feel vulnerability. And so if you don't have nobody sharing with, and then you don't trust sharing with certain people because they'll turn it against you. Mm-hmm. So, you're trying to cope with this, and it's not until you get older and maybe you share something with your wife, and then you're like, and she's like, damn, you let it all out. Because I've seen dudes in there, you can't cry in prison. Mm-hmm. If something happened, man, you just, you don't want anybody to see that weakness. Oh, that nigga, he weak, man. Look at that mama, so you hold it all in. And I know I held in a lot of stuff, and it wasn't until later on when I was able to kind of like deal with some of that. And people are like, oh, go talk to the count. I'm not telling them shit. This motherfucker, he don't give a fuck. Mm-hmm. So you want somebody who really cares about you, and it's usually, like you said, you get out and you find a woman who you could trust. Because there's very few like homies that you can really, because everybody's trying to be tough.
That's the other part too. That's what I was saying about how to navigate, how to identify, navigate, and then cope with fear. Right? It was really eye-opening for me when I would see guys that were in the groups that we were in the joint, hardcore guys, and that they would cry. There would be a moment that they would be tapped into, that they would tap into something that had happened to them or whatever, and they would publicly cry in this group. And of course, you're supposed to trust that the group's not going to take that out to the yard, but we all know that sometimes people in that group, they don't give a shit. They're just in there trying to get the chrono to go into the next thing. But what was even more impactful, I feel like, for that person that was crying was realizing that you can do that, go out to the yard, and even though this motherfucker right here may be out there talking shit, spreading word, this dude was in there crying and is weak and all this type of stuff, it rarely ever resulted in anything.
That's right.
When the motherfucker went back out to the yard and still stood up for himself.
That's
I
right.
did.
Yeah.
I did fucking cry. So what?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What does that mean? What is that going? What is going to happen because of it? And when you come with that type of energy, that for me, that's strength and that courage to be vulnerable and then defend yourself by being vulnerable, right? It changes the way that people see that.
Yeah.
I watched whole yards change because people started to realize, like, oh, they would respect that person actually instead of try to break them down. But you had to have that next level strength to be like, yo, I'm gonna be myself. I'm gonna be vulnerable. I'm gonna pursue all of these things, and I'm gonna say, so what? Who's got a fucking problem with it?
Well, it shows the human side to somebody who's well respected, and that if he did it, damn man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, whoa, man, maybe I need to go in that class. I ain't gonna tell nobody, but I'm gonna slide in there the next time.
Yeah.
You know, so it opens up, and that's the thing. It's like, you know, you have a perception of, you know, this guy that's hard and this and that, and a lot of times, like, you know, like I said, I've seen guys and hurt, man, I just want to get out, man. I'm tired of this shit, man. And you're like, damn, man. And it makes you think like, you know, these guys are human too. You know, there's some people that are human that, you know, they're forgotten, or you're in just a really dark environment, but you still got to have a sense of hope. And when you look at these people, you know, you kind of like, you don't want to write them off, but you want to at least feel like, you know, they're human too. It's like, what happened? Like when I drive by certain people, I'm like, man, what happened to that person? Man's life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't look at them like, oh, I really look, bro, because I'm like, man, I could be, you know, when I got out, I didn't have a place to go. Yeah. I was living in a halfway house. I didn't know where I was going. I'm biding my time. Like, man, I got two more months to find a home. Yeah. You know what I mean? I don't have no car. I had nothing. So I always I don't never look at a person and think like, oh man, I'm thinking like, damn man, I'm glad I never got hooked. I'm glad I never tried. Like, what happened, man? How'd that happen? Like, I'm always trying to figure shit out, you know, and you never know a person's circumstances. So, you know, I think that's how we change shit rather than, you know, enabling stuff, because you got to figure out like why, then try to have a solution. But yeah, man.
I mean, you know, when I dropped out and I left, man, I went on to have cellies of every different kind, right? I had cellies that were ex-skinheads, I had cellies that were ex-AB, I had cellies that were ex-Southsiders, right? All these different things. And I remember, you know, I remember being with these guys, man, and hearing them talk, and it was like, shit, man, we all got the same fucking stories.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that was a big part of my change. And then the other part about it was, I remember a lot of young dudes that would be on the yard, right? And they would come in and had never been even to the main line, right? They locked it up in the back of a cop car and all this stuff, and they would come in onto the S&Y yards. And over there, you got gangs, you got politics, you got all the same shit. It's all the same motherfuckers, man, just in different ways, you know? But they didn't, it was, for me, it made me feel good to show them that you can also be different and still be respected in here, right? And what I mean by that is that I would be on the yard, and here I am, this ex-white Crip, right? But I hang with everybody. I am heavily involved in education and self-help, right? I believe in empathy and kindness and compassion and trust. And I would say these things. I was vocal about this type of stuff on the yard, in friend circles, in groups, all that, right? And what was really cool was to see how other guys really responded to that, right? That they actually felt that way too, right? It's like what you're talking about, where these guys were like, oh man, I want to change, man, and this and that, right? When nobody else is around, right? When they don't feel like they got to put a front on for anybody, or when they don't feel threatened in any type of way, right? And that's why even in my last podcast, I talk about how I feel like what people really search for in their life is just peace and harmony, right? They just want to feel an internal amount of peace and harmonious toward in their life. And it was really cool to be able to be on these yards and be like, nah, man, I'm fucking, Yeah, I was an ex-white crib, or I was this, or I was that, but I believe in this, and I believe in that, and da-da-da. And sometimes I'd be afraid of whether or not people were going to judge me for it, but I didn't let that deter me from still standing on my own too and being like, this is what my beliefs are. And it was infectious. Other people would also be emboldened by somebody doing that, and then they too would stand up. Yeah, you're fucking getting down on this dude for I believe in kindness too. You know what I mean? Yeah. And now everybody's being hard about being kind. Yeah. You see what I'm saying?
Same energy, but a positive.
Same energy, but a positive.
Yeah.
And that's a really it's a really kind of like deep thing, because I remember reading in college, man, about how society is just a bunch of social contracts, right? And what was meant by that was like, it's just me and you agreeing on something. So let's just say, for example, me and you hate each other. We only hate each other because me and you agree to hate each other. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So it's a social contract in that way. But what if you and I just decide to not hate each other? Right? Doesn't matter what anybody else says. Doesn't matter what our culture says. Doesn't matter any of that type of stuff. What if you and I just decide right here, right now, that we don't hate each other, and instead we just want to be kind to each other, right? That's a new social contract. That means that the whole way that we are going to affect each other is different. Now, if you're on a yard, right, and you got these guys trying to get this phone and these guys trying to get this phone, if everybody just decided that they were going to be respectful and everybody was going to be able to use and have the phone, there was going to be enough time, that's just the reality of what it would be. Do you understand what I'm saying by that?
Well, it's being able to not play in the narratives, man. But there's people, I call them almost like the people who are race baiters who make money off that.
Yeah.
Off the divide. It's like me going into, in prison, like, okay, the blacks is watching BT and they're watching sports. But I'm over here, I want to see the Barrett Jackson or NASCAR. So I got to look through the window. Because I can't go in there because it's a white boy TV room and the one dude's cool, but his homies might trip, and then the black's like, hey, man, if you go over there, they're going to want to come in our room. It creates a whole bunch of stupid shit about watching this. So I would sometimes get the TV out here and be watching it, and literally I'm watching the cars bid. Like, one day I'm going to go there, and, dude's like, oh, man, you think you're going to buy one of those and go there? I'm like, yeah, maybe one day. Who knows, And they would be mad because they're like, oh, you're watching this, and I'm sitting next to white dude, me and him talking about cars.
You're dreaming.
And we're out here enjoying ourselves. But they don't, like, there's certain forces that don't like to see that. And it's just like people on the street. There's certain people that, this conversation, maybe they don't want to see it, but it is a reality, and we can make change.
Yeah.
And that's why I like having people on to show that, because it's not all what people think. And when, like you said, traveling, you start talking to other people, and they're like, well, damn, I didn't know that, blah, blah, blah. That's different. What you mean? You were a crip back then? What? You did this? You were, not you. Wow. And it fucks them up.
Yeah, and I guess maybe that's a part of why I think the way that I do is because I feel like I experienced that from the very beginning. It was always eye-opening for people when they had a preconceived notion of based off of the way that I looked, right? And then when you spent time with me, usually that preconceived notion started to like break down into me just representing who I really am, right? Mm-hmm. Which was different sometimes than what they thought it was going to be. I remember the last podcast that I went on, which was the first one, and the comments, right? I had to learn, don't even read the comments, right?
No.
But the point out of the thing is that I was reading some of these comments in the beginning, and I was getting heated, because you have all these people that, what I call they dick ride the gangster life, right? They think they know it and all this different stuff, and they play it from the sidelines though. And real ones started to pop up, right? Speak for me and validate who I was and all this different type of stuff. But that wasn't the important part. The important part out of it was all of these people had this preconceived notion based off of the way that I looked, the way that my tattoos looked, right? And all these different things, and they just came to all these conclusions about what was real and what's not real, right? Without actually really listening to the message that I'm actually trying to get across, And sometimes I like it. Sometimes I like the fact that people got me fucked up, because then it allows me to see people play their card before it is, and I can kind of gauge their true intention of how it is, with me. But my whole life I had to deal with that. It was always that way when I was a kid and even now and all these different things. And It's a cool lesson to go through because it allows me to enter things with a beginner's mind, meaning like I can go into a situation and not have a preconceived notion about it, or at least challenge it when it comes into my thoughts, right? I might look at you and there's a certain thought that comes in, but I want to challenge it because of my own way of receiving how people preconceive who I am.
Well, that's I'm not going to say cool thing about prison, but prison, you're all wearing the same shit.
Yeah.
You can't really hide, guys who, they think they're like all this and that on the street. You see, like, you can have the tattoos, the gold, and you act like you're this and that, and come to find out in prison, like, dude was taking your commissary, or dude, you weren't really cut like that. You were, hiding out in the chapel. You weren't really about that life, but now you got these tattoos, and everybody thinks you're one thing. And like the dude who you think is a square, because I seen a dude in there, square, looked like he talked whatever. This dude's a cold martial artist. Some goddamn whoop 10 dudes, like a beast but quiet, humble.
I knew this dude named Mean Dean Dunham from Orange County, right? White guy that looked like a highway patrolman. No tattoos, no facial, clean shaved, super respectful, and is known as one of the fucking killers in the California prison system. You know what I mean? Like, he is no joke.
That's what I mean. It's not like...
It messed people up. I saw him hiding out. He was my cellie for a little bit, right? But Dean looked like that. And then I remember on the yard, he got into it with this dude. And next thing you know, we're going through the chow line, right? And everybody's dumping their tray. Boom, boom. You have the scullery right there, right? Where they rack the trays and clean and everything. And the doors are open. The scullery workers are in there. So we're going by with our trays. Boom, boom. And next thing you know, we look over and we see Dean hiding down, right? Waiting for this guy to come through that he was going to get. He's hiding. He's leaning down. He's got a knife like this, right? And he's just hanging out. We go, oh shit, fucking Dean, man. And next thing you know, boom, bah, right? They're busting and shit's going down because Dean's booking this dude. Never would have thought it. This guy that played him was blasted all back on the face. Hardcore gangster, thought Dean was soft, all this type of stuff, man. And didn't realize Dean was with the business, man, in a major way.
Yeah.
Even in a psycho way.
Yeah.
Like in a way that's like
diabolical.
Okay, like Dean, you low key belong in here because you're a good dude. You've been good to me my whole life, man. So don't even trip. But at the same time, like you believe like when somebody crosses you,
that's a wrap.
That's a wrap, and you're gonna be quiet about it. You know, it's not you letting that person know, yo, we're getting into it and all of that. You're gonna let it go and all of that, and the person doesn't even know what they just stepped into right now. And so preconceived notions, man, they can really get you in a lot of trouble. That's for sure.
What is one of the craziest things you've seen in prison? Like with, you like think back like, man, that shit right there, man. Like you couldn't even do a movie about that shit. It's just like wild.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, the violence for sure. I went through my own stuff, right? I had whole yards kick off over me. I was involved in this, in extreme politics, right, on the 180 level force, so you don't get any higher than that, I saw everybody from people trying to commit suicide, right, all the way over to committing murder. There was, I remember being in the cell, and like 3 cells down, there was this Tongan dude, right, and he was getting all spun out on crystal meth for like 3 days, 4 days. And he ended up beating his cellie to death and literally kicked his whole face off, kicked his jaw all the way off his face and stuff. Yeah. And then walked out in the morning time. We heard it. The cops, everything. Cop was asleep right up in the tower.
Wow.
And we in the cells around him were telling him, chill. Even the essays, trusha. They're trying to tell him like, yo, chill out, right? Because it just sounded so brutal. And then in the morning time when they racked it for chow, he comes walking out with a soda, spun the fuck out, goes and sits down and goes, yo, I just killed my cellie. You guys go in there and get that dude, man. And I was like...
It's not even a clue.
It's just so traumatizing to even hear it. To even hear it and be a part of it, But there was also like a lot of things, man, that aren't violent. There's a lot of stuff that was really fun and funny, in a lot of different ways. I had this cellie named Smokey, man. He was another biker. I liked all the biker dudes, when I dropped out of the gang, I liked the biker guys because they were all about like individuality and just and not living by prison politics. So I used to like to hear their stories about them going on motorcycle runs and all that type of stuff. And a lot of the older biker dudes liked me. They liked that I had been an ex-white Crip because they thought it was like I was bucking the system, and that's kind of like what a lot of bikers are about.
Yeah, rebels.
So they were like, they were like, that's it's rebellious in its own way, right? Yeah. But I had this old Sully Smokey, and he had been down since 1976, I believe.
Damn.
Yeah, man.
76?
1976. Yeah. Fought the death penalty. He killed a police like lieutenant or something up in the Bay Area, right? He was up in Frisco, and who had been working with their club with counterfeit money. This cop would seize counterfeit money and then would sell it to the club, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So shit went bad between them. Smokey was out there from Illinois to make a deal, right? Went all bad. And Smokey ends up killing this dude, beats him with a ball peen hammer in the garage, right? Okay. Smokey, though, fast forward. Now I know him. And now he's just showing me all his photos of when he was healthy, because now he's just old and like breaking down, right? Hepatitis C, he's all fucked up and shit like that. And one day we're watching the Olympic trials for gymnastics, and this guy lets go and does the flip and then lands the flip, right? Smokey tells me, he goes, I can do that. And I went, shut the fuck, you can't do that shit, man. He goes, yeah, when did you learn gymnastics? Right? So he tells me, he goes, in YA. And I go, no way. He goes, yeah, back in the 70s, they used to have gymnastics in YA in the state of California. And I was like, damn, that's crazy. He goes, so you can't do that now. He goes, no, I can do that. And I go, Smokey, don't even try.
Yeah.
Like, you're gonna, and fast forward a couple of weeks, right? We're on the yard. This is in Calipat. We're on the yard. And I got a friend of mine named Renegade who's a Mongol, right? And so I'm leaning on the fence and I'm talking to Ren, and Smokey comes up behind me, right? And I remember he had his old school tumbler. Remember the old tumblers that everybody would tack on? So anyways, he had his old tumbler and stuff. It's all tatted with like, biker stuff on it and stuff. And so I look over my shoulder and I see Smokey right here, and I go, Ren, man, can you believe it, man? OG right here says that he can flip off these bars and stuff like that. And, me and Ren, we laugh. And Smokey gets really mad, right? He slams his cup down. And he goes walking on. We don't think about it. And I just happen to look over as this dude's letting go of the bar to do the flip. And I realize he's not going to make it.
Oh!
And this dude, he's like bent up, and he lands head first, pile drives into the dirt on the yard.
Oh, shit.
Boom, he hits the yard, and I just remember the essays that were sitting down, they went, fuck, Holmes, is he okay? Right? Because this cloud of dust was lifted, and Smokey was just laying there unconscious on the ground, bro.
Shit.
So I go running over there, right? I'm like, damn, I think low-key, I'm like, he might have broke his neck. So I run over there, and when I run over there, I grab him, and he goes, phew. I just remember seeing the dirt go like this, like breathing out. And so I help him up, and he's struggling up, and I'm like, where are you hurt? Where are you hurt? Does it hurt here? Does it hurt here? I'm like rotating his shoulders and shit to see if he's truly fucked up. And he's like, oh, he gets punched up to his feet, and I realize he's okay. So we lead him over to the shower, right? And we lead him, on the yard, right? So we lead him over to the shower. Pow, we hit the shower thing, and it wakes him up, right? He's like, right? So bandana, like half on his head and stuff. And we're like, yo, man, you got to go to medical, right? Because, Smokey was in his 60s at the time.
Damn,
60s in the joint, it looks like you're 80.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Smoke, if you're watching this, I love you, man. But anyways, so we get him in, and he's like, I ain't going to medical, and this and that. We're like, you got to go in there. So we get him in there. He goes in there, and about 10 minutes later, he comes walking out. He's got ice packs and shit strapped on. So he comes walking out, and all of a sudden, I just start a slow clap, and then the whole yard starts clapping, and it breaks into this huge applause for Smokey. He's like, and I think like that's important, because everybody, the violence is there. We know that about the joint, but a lot of times, man, we forget that there's a lot of us there that are, and he used to call, I learned a lot from Smoke. Smokey was the one that taught me, man, never stop reaching. Yeah. I remember one time, man, I had an opportunity for somebody that was coming into my life and all this stuff, and I was like, yo, I'm good on this and this and that. And he goes, man, look, Ty, the walls provide enough isolation on their own. You don't need to help it. right? Always reach beyond the wall, man, because as hurtful as it might be and all that stuff, you could deal with the pain of things not working out and all that type of stuff. You got life in prison. You dealt with that. He goes, but don't let that hold you back from trying to reach for something that you might have hope towards, you know? And I just always stuck with me, man, because of how he was. His mentality was amazing. And it just helped me to continue to feel free, even in that state of incarceration, for sure, you know? But I love stories like that. I like sharing the ones that are fun and funny. And
yeah,
man.
Well, Ty, man, shit, bro, it's been a pleasure, like, hearing your background, how you grew up, how you dealt with a life sentence, how you were able to change your life, the transformation, coming from your background and what you're doing now. Hearing it from you, some youngster at home watching this, there's a lot of kids that grew up on my channel. You know, I've been doing this for like over a decade, and me and my partner, man, you know, this is our way of giving back, because I think about like all the, you know, kids out there who maybe want to be BMXers or skaters or artists, whatever. And I did all of that. I drew, you know, and I'm like, man, like, if they hear this, maybe they'll be like, you know what, I'm going to go to fashion school, art class, or I'm going to keep skateboarding Big Herc, or I'm going to stop doing this and going to the military. And, you know, it's all about like putting that positive thought, planting that seed in that one kid who will actually hear the message and save their lives, man. So that's what this is all about, bro. So
yeah, I want to first off thank you. You know, I appreciate you having me on and being able to meet you and all of that. You know, and the energy that you provided. You know, you talk about being a service, and that's really a huge portion of the way that I live my life. I feel really bad for a lot of the things that I've done in my life, right? And I learned about amends, right, and what amends is and how do you actually do it. And the way that I was taught is that there's 3 different types. There's direct, indirect, and living amends. And very rarely do we get to have direct amends to the people that we hurt or to the community that we hurt, right? Because sometimes we're either locked away or we move on with our life or whatever. But living amends and indirect amends is really important because it's a way of giving back and acknowledging the wrongs that I've done in my life, right? And the remorse. It's about expressing that remorse and actually putting that remorse into action. And that's why I'm here, and this is why I do these things now, is because I want to be of service, right? Mm-hmm. I want people to also understand that they have the ability and the power and the strength in their life to be able to change whatever circumstance it is that they don't feel good about, and be able to, like, you know, reinvent themselves and move forward into a place that they want to be. So, you know, that's what I'm here for too, man.
And what is your social media for people who want to reach out to you?
Ty Corcoran, TYCORCORAN. And I don't do much on my social media. I post on my story more than anything else. But yo, if people want to reach out or whatever, then you know, I'm right there, man, with open arms.
All right, yeah, man, I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, man.
Yeah.
Hey, we're gonna have to do it again, man.
Definitely.
All right, man. Appreciate it.
For sure. Yeah.
There you have it, Big Herc 916,
Oh, shit.
fresh out.